going to introduce Pam Aiken, who is the chair of the Council of 100 currently, and she's going to give you some more information about this event. Pam?
Thank you, Susan. Hello to everyone. I am so happy that we have this opportunity to sit down and talk with one another and reflect on the Council 100. I'm trusting that each of you and your families are safe and well, and that the past year has been a good year compared to the pandemic. This is a special time for the Council 100, our 2021 event. For the past 33 years, up until the time of the pandemic, we have honored a distinguished woman artist. And over the past 2 years, all the challenges that we have faced, I am proud to say that the Fresno Art Museum, under the direction of Michele, the staff and she have never stopped working for the museum, never stopped connecting with people, and never have stopped promoting art in our community. It is because of them, not us, that we have the opportunity to do this Zoom. And I want to thank each of them for all of the hard work behind the scenes so we have this opportunity to connect today and move forward. Today, we're going to look back in the history of the Council 100. So I want you to understand one thing. This conversation is about you, the viewer. This distinguished woman artist is a valuable and important one, but without the viewer, those of you who go to galleries and exhibits and concerts and meetings and organization, it doesn't move forward. So today, I hope you'll take the invitation that we're giving you to comment in the chat room after the discussions. Give us your comments, your thoughts, and your concerns, where you'd like to see the C100 move forward. Because after the pandemic, we realized that we have a new beginning if we take the opportunity and the challenge and move forward. And so please, get a cup of coffee, get a cup of tea, sit down at us and join us in the conversation about the Council 100. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Michele Ellis Pracy.
Thank you, Pam, very much. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Michele Ellis Pracy, Executive Director and Chief Curator of the Fresno Art Museum. I am honored to introduce you to our keynote speaker today, previous Executive Director of the FAM, Robert Barrett. Before he speaks, however, here is some background about Robert. This year, the Fresno Art Museum is 72 years old. During a seminal 15-year period, Robert Barrett was FAM's Executive Director from July 1980 to June 1995. He was barely 30 years old. As Pam Aiken and I considered how to organize this event today on the history of the Council of 100, for me, it was a given that Robert be invited as our keynote speaker, because the Council of 100 came to fruition a few years into his stewardship of FAM. Robert and I are Facebook friends, so I sent him a note inviting him to participate. Happily, he agreed. It is because of Robert's progressive vision, fearless determination, and his sensitivity to women artists' visibility, or not, that the Council of 100 was established in 1988 and remains a jewel in FAM's programming crown these 3+ decades later. During his tenure at the Fresno Art Museum, Robert did many things. He sought funding and oversaw a 15,000 square foot addition to the original Fresno Art Center facility. He cemented FAM as an American Alliance of Museums accredited fine art museum and also as a center for women in the arts. He created the Council of 100 with many others, an auxiliary member group that selected one woman artist a year for a solo exhibition with an accompanying catalog. Robert focused exhibitions on California artists, curating them and producing catalogs. He instituted an artist in residence program. He established FAM's endowment, which is now at over $1 million. He implemented member communications and media relations programs, as I said, among many, many other things. For Robert, there was a life after the Fresno Art Museum. When he left FAM in 1995, he moved to Los Angeles, where he continued working with a focus on marketing cultural tourism, interfacing over the years with the LA Convention Center, the Getty, Otis College of Art and Design, Disney, and LACMA. He also worked with the cities of Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, and his home now, Rancho Mirage, creating business plans and marketing strategies for their cultural tourism entities. So with this rich, unflagging, and expert background, it is my pleasure to introduce Robert Barrett, who in my opinion paved the way for the future of the Fresno Art Museum, and he established a legacy worth building upon. Thank you. And Robert, I'm turning the event over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. How sweet, how kind of you. Your wonderful introduction and the opportunity for me to share my recollections about the establishment of the Women's Year and the Distinguished Award. I want to express my appreciation to Pam Aiken, the chair of the Council of 100, for ensuring its endurance and continuation during a very difficult period. Thank you, Pam, for that hard work over these many years. And Joyce, how wonderful it is to see you. Joyce Aiken curated the opening exhibition of the Year of the Woman at the Fresno Art Museum in '86. She was an early advocate for the concept. Also, Joyce was a close collaborator with and advisor to curator Catherine Funk for the entire program. More on that later. And Margaret Lazari, how nice to be with you. It's always great to be with a distinguished woman artist of the museum, and I really respect and admire the legacy that you bring to the program. And Barbara Van Arnam, how lovely to see you. I remember when I came to visit your home and studio when I was curating Next Wave, Fresno Artists to Watch in the 90s, an exhibition in 1991 that you participated in. And thank you also, Barbara, for the years of service as the chair of the Council of 100 during a very difficult period of time. I understand your strength kept it all together. So I'm currently writing my memoir, and I'm doing it without many notes because I wasn't one to keep a lot of records of my public life. I find it really interesting to think about what I've done in my life and to try to highlight the major aspects of it. So that's what I've done today in preparing this presentation for you. We're going to go through it very quickly. It takes about 20 minutes. So this is a journey on how the Women's Year came about and how the Council of 100 was formed. And I always have to go to my personal journey, which is a part of it because my perception and my worldview is a very big part of it. And I have to celebrate my wonderful parents, Alice and Charlie Barrett, who moved to Iran in 1954, and I moved with them. I grew up in Iran and Italy. My mother was born in 1902, my father in 1902 and my mother in 1904. They both graduated with degrees. My mother in geology, my father in petroleum engineer. They were a dynamic couple. They believed in equity and fairness with one another, and they gave me a really good example. My mother was a powerful woman, and I never was ever afraid of befriending women and enjoying their company because of the strength of my mother. You should know that we moved to Fresno to take care of my parents who lived in Carmel, and to take care of Barbara's parents who lived in Coalinga. In our 14-year tenure in Fresno completed their life. They both lived at the Nazareth House. In fact, all of our parents ended their life at the Nazareth House. But my years in Italy and Iran, I never saw a female artist. There weren't such things. I mean, Artemisia Gentileschi was in the vaults in the 1950s and 60s at the Uffizi. Women artists simply weren't spoken of. But when I came to the United States after graduating high school in 1964 and started art school, it was a revelation to be surrounded by wonderful and powerful women artists. My first boss was Peggy Volkus, who was Peter's wife, the sculptor. She ran the cultural arts program for the city of Oakland, and she hired me to work as a painting instructor at Studio One, adult painting instructor. And I taught a class called Painting from My Imagination. Over 30 women signed up for it semester after semester during my graduate years. And I taught this class based on a setup with models, literature, and music. And the students would all paint, and then the next session We would discuss their paintings in a critique. These women, some of them were the who's who of the Bay Area at the time and Berkeley, were so impressive to me. Their commitment to their art, their commitment to themselves, their commitment to one another. It was my first experience working with a large group of women, and it impressed me and carried with me for a long period. But then in the early 70s, when we lived in Long Beach, I saw an Eva Hesse show at the Pasadena Museum of Art. In Pasadena, that's now the Norton Simon. Her work could be seen on the left. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. Duchamp and his fey European notion of concept was blown out the window by Eva Hesse. There was this powerful, visceral work that I never forgot. And I always wondered if it was based on the fact that she was a woman, that she could produce this work. And there wasn't really much talk about that. She was presented just as an artist, of course. And then there's Louise Bourgeois. In 1981, I went to New York from the Fresno Art Museum to pick up a grant that we received from the Metropolitan Life Foundation. And I happened to go into MoMA, not knowing a thing about Louise Bourgeois, and there was her very, very famous show. Next slide, please. I'm an adult docent at the Palm Springs Art Museum in my retirement. And I like to include the Louise Bourgeois that's in our collection because I use it as the source of feminism, as a basis of explaining feminism in women in the arts. Now, Louise would say she was not a feminist, nor was she a surrealist, but of course, she was grounded in both sensibilities. She is such an important artist. The director of MoMA said to one of his curators to go out and find a feminist artist in the late 70s. And the result was her exhibition at MoMA. Now, Louise Bourgeois exemplifies a rejection of Clement Greenberg's dictates that art must address the elements of art. Bourgeois dives headlong into memories and feelings, and by doing so, gave other women artists permission to do this likewise. Now, she wasn't the first, but what's important about her show is, well, even Robert Hughes, the bellicose Robert Hughes, a critic of Time magazine, his reaction was positive, extremely positive. This exhibition launched a new era on the highest level of the art establishment for women, though we were hardly there. When I was hired to be the director of the Fresno Museum in 1980, there was a promise that a new museum would be built, and it was the first order of business. There are some pillars underneath this effort that have to always be mentioned, and they were the wonderful Clarence Harris, a person who has always been a mentor to me and somebody I remember with great fondness today. The Janata Company, headed up by Joanne Lippert, and of course the wonderful Mary LaFollette, who became a director of development at the museum and a very important person in the museum's history. And during this time, Anita Shanahan joined the museum. More about Anita later, but also a few others that are so important that made the museum that we all enjoy today. Larry Balakian, James Hollowell, and the Bonner Family Foundation, headed up by Kay Cummings. We raised the money in record time, designed the museum while raising the funds to pay for it, and opened the museum in March 1983. How about the next slide? The intensity of the years raising the funds and building the museum and preparing for the opening exhibition was so intense that I had very little time to think about programming the institution in a way that would be appropriate for the region in which it was situated. However, soon after the museum was reopened, I began to think deeply about how to best program the institution, and I began to address the question with many friends from my past life. The first, of course, was Peggy Volkas, who I admired so deeply. And she suggested that we focus on crafts because very few museums were focused on crafts. But she introduced me to Ruth Asawa. Ruth Asawa, this great, wonderful artist that she was, and a community arts advocate and arts education advocate, became a longtime friend. I consulted with Ruth all the years that I was in Long Beach as the visual arts supervisor, and she helped me devise an artist residency for the city of Long Beach that I carried over when I came to Fresno, because I realized people love to meet artists. They love to hear the stories from artists and about how they go about doing their work. Ruth and I had many, many discussions about multiculturalism and identity in the arts. And it's important to note that many artists, historians see the women's art movement as a significant aspect of the identity politics movement that started in the 1960s and continues today. Viola Fry, my wonderful artist, she was an honoree. She was my ceramic teacher in college. And I was the janitor for her in the ceramic department. And she was the first to tell me that women artists deserved more attention. Robert Beckham was a renowned photorealist painter who was a printmaker also and a teacher of mine, a favorite teacher of mine at CCA. And he was an advocate of emphasizing printmaking at the museum. He thought we could build a really interesting printmaking program. Arthur Okamura, another teacher, he thought that we should focus on agriculture and environmental sustainability as a theme for Fresno. Toby Moss, director and owner of Toby Moss Gallery in Los Angeles, introduced me to Helen Lundeberg. And she thought that older artists were getting little attention and they deserved more, and a program could be built that addressed this issue. We could see the next slide. I often invited artists to join the board retreats, which we took every 2 years when I was the director of the Art Museum. Susan, can we have the next slide, please? So in this slide, and the next slide, Susan. Oh, I think we missed this. Oh, yeah, and then let's go on to the next slide after that. And the next slide. And the next slide.
There we go.
I want to show you this slide because here we're on board retreat at the Harris Ranch Resort. Go back one. And you can see on the far right, Toby Moss. She joined us, as did June Wayne, who's seated on the floor in the middle. And Jack Rutberg is right by Mary LaFollette. You see him peeking over the shoulders in the back row. And then you see many of the other important players at the museum. Toby's suggestion regarding older artists stuck with me and was eventually reflected in the distinguished appellation included in the concept and the name of the award. The next slide, please. June Wayne, artist, iconoclast, founder of the Tamarind Press. Initially, June was absolutely against the idea of a women's year. She thought it would be another form of segregation. June was a dear friend, and she reminded me again and again that she was an artist first, and she happened to be a woman. June, however, was a strong advocate of the museum, ensuring that its programs and exhibition schedule was developed with a full commitment to equity. June's brilliant mind and capable strategic thinking kept me coming back to her for discussions on how to find a niche for the museum and would help one that would help put the institution on the map. June helped me greatly, as well as the board, take our decisions with deliberative care. She deserved to be the recipient of the museum's first Distinguished Artist Award for many, many reasons. Next slide, please. And most importantly, Jean Ray Laurie, who I commissioned to curate a number of quilt shows for the museum. Jean and I became very good friends, and she and I worked on the California Heritage Quilt Project and the subsequent show and publication Ho California that premiered at the Fresno Art Museum. Jean was a very smart, strategic thinker and understood why I was searching for an idea to provide the museum a distinctive niche upon which a unique reputation could be built. Next slide, please. Often joining me on my travels in the state were Anita Shanahan and Jane Cleave. Jane and Anita were dear friends during my Fresno years. On museum business, we went to galleries, artist studios, and museums up and down the state. Both Jane and Anita took a keen interest in what I was doing, observing my ability to foster friends for the museum, and helped me vet ideas for exhibitions and much, much more. More importantly, they told others in Fresno what I was up to and what was happening at the museum. They served as my de facto public relations team. By the time I asked the board to approve a year's exhibition schedule, the board members were already sold on an idea thanks to the enthusiasm of Jane and Anita. Over time, the following themes were identified that we were thinking about deeply. Next slide, please. Agriculture, sustainability, and the environment. In fact, I was still thinking about it in the 1990s when I brought Alan Sondquist to Fresno for a month-long residency and exhibition to help me vet this idea about agricultural and sustainability in the land. He and I both agreed, however, that it probably wouldn't be exciting enough for Fresno, believe it or not. The next slide, please. Globalism, multiculturalism, and identity was a program idea that we vetted and talked about a great deal. And identity, as you know, is a category under which women's art and feminism is categorized now. Graphics. I thought for a period of time that graphic arts might be a nice niche for the museum. And we did inform the Graphic Arts Council that was sustained during my tenure at the museum. But the idea of women in the arts is percolating with increasing interest in my discussions. Even June Wang was coming around. It made sense not just because of Judy Chicago's class at Cal State University, Fresno, but because from the 1960s on, women's art movement was a dominant topic in the media, on the streets, and distinctive artist strategies such as Women House in LA, and our own Nancy Yodelman was a part of that, and the Guerrilla Girls in New York. In 1971, when I was in art school, Linda Nochlin asked in her seminal art news article, "Why have there been no great women artists?" The question resonated for decades. Next slide, please. Overarchingly, all the issues of equity that the women's movement had been fighting for throughout the 20th century and before were very much in the foreground. However, as we know, in the 1960s, the American women's movement gained momentum and with the leadership of many, many dynamic people. I identified with and supported the premise behind Nochlin's question. I began to imagine a strategy that could help put the Fresno Art Museum on the map. The tipping point, next slide, please. The tipping point for me was a dinner conversation with Jean Marie Laurie in which we discussed our grandmothers. My father's mother is on the left. My mother's mother is on the right, and she's on the far right of the picture with the big hat on. My grandmothers were born just after the Civil War, married my grandfathers in the 1890s, never worked outside their homes, gave birth to multiple children at home, never drove a car, never traveled more than 50 miles from their homes, and didn't get to vote until they were in their into their 50s. Jean's grandmother's story was similar. When comparing our grandmothers, their worldviews, their life experiences to the aspirations and expectations of women in the 1980s, it was easy to conclude that a profound change had occurred and was occurring and would continue to occur until equity was achieved. From the beginning, the concept was to introduce the theme of women in the arts through a year-long program and then continue the commitment in ongoing programs. The rest is history. We have kept the focus on California as the bigger world would have been unimaginable for the Fresno Art Museum. I'm proud to state that the Fresno Art Museum's exhibition schedule has been equitable ever since. Curator Catherine Funk devoted 2 years preparing for the Women's Show. She worked tirelessly conceiving the year's schedule of over 20 different exhibitions. Catherine researched and selected guest curators, Joyce Aiken being one. However, Catherine curated the majority of the shows herself. For almost a year, she was on the road, and we would talk mostly on the phone. And listen, if you could see our cars in those days, it was something to be on the road in those cars. The paperwork and logistics were daunting. Catherine shared my belief in the importance of the mission and played a very major role in the delivery of what many of us remember as a seminal museum experience. The year culminated with a seminar that brought to Fresno many of the who's who of the women's art movement, and Catherine organized that aspect of the program as well. Anita Shanahan introduced me to Virginia Farquhar. Anita's savviness regarding who could do what job was always spot on. But in the instance of suggesting Virginia Farquhar as the founding chair of the Council of 100, Anita demonstrated the legacy leadership that she has come to be known for and greatly admired for. Virginia Farquhar was a perfect choice, Brilliant of mind, traditional in demeanor, steady in temperament, soft-spoken yet determined, Virginia Farquhar helped deliver over 30 years of radical feminist revisionism to Fresno. Over the years, the Council of 100 has provided very significant financial support, advice, and public relations for the program. They are the backbone of the program, and thank you all that are members. When Virginia questioned what we were going to do once the Women's Year ended, I was ready. I proposed that we continue the focus with an annual award that bestowed on a California woman artist with the following parameters. The artist must be a California resident. She must be 60 years or older. She must be of significant importance to other artists. She must have important gallery representation, have acclaimed museum shows, and be reviewed and very favorably in the media. The award would include the following: a catalog with an essayist of the artist's choosing, an interview with the artist included in the catalogs that her own words regarding her work would be included in the record, distribution of the catalog to relevant California national museums, and a baccarat crystal ball. In addition, the artist would have to agree to deliver a formal lecture, presentation of her life and work as part of the opening recession. As we go through life, we all have our share of regrets. Most regrets don't linger for the duration, but a few do. Now, as an older man with lots of time to look back, one of my very few regrets is that we didn't document the Women's Year with a publication or a film. Such documentation could have had profound impact for our museum. On the other hand, I do relish a number of achievements that I'm very proud to be a part of. Two of them are from my Fresno years. Few people get to be part of a team that builds a museum. Lucky me, I have that accomplishment in my forever memory bank. But a small museum without a niche is just another small museum. I'm also very honored to have played a leadership role in conceiving and delivering the launch of the Fresno Art Museum's important and ongoing commitment to California women artists. The Fresno Art Museum, the Council of 100, and your personal dedication and commitment to this work over the last 30 years has done a great deal to answer Linda Notchland's question posed in 1971. Now a great artist, now 50 years later, we do indeed know there are legions of great women artists, and we are so very much enriched because of their work. Thank you.
I'm going to turn the morning over to Pam Aiken once again, who will moderate the panel that have gathered today for all of our benefits. Thank you again, Robert.
Yes, thank you, Robert. That was going into the depth of the Council 100 Museum. All I can say is wow. And everyone that I have seen on my screen, you have contributed greatly to the success. And so I too thank you. You know, the Council 100 has three functions the way I see it. It has a function of selecting the artists, the distinguished artists. It has a function of raising the money to pay for the exhibit. And then we have the function of actually the exhibiting and hosting a luncheon. But to me, the hardest one, the most daunting one, is the selection committee. And as Robert said, what are the qualifications of the artist? Our selection committee is too a very strong and important role in this. And this is due to the chair. Now, the chair has the opportunity to select the committee. And because, as Robert said, the artist has to be outside 50 miles of Fresno, oftentimes the committee is made up of women in our community working and performing and doing art. It also has the executive director and the chair of the Council 100. Now, the executive director, his role is to know what is coming towards the museum as far as the exhibit, prepare for it, curate it, and do it. My role, all I do, is get to be the deciding factor if there's a tie, which I hope I haven't had, and I hope I never will have one. But having said that, both the director and I have the great opportunity to look at all the women artists that are presented by the committee. And how they narrow it down to just one is always a surprise, because there is so much talent and wealth among the people they submit. But the direction of the chair is actually the reason why we have it. And that chair has been for a very long time, Ann Scheid. She comes to that committee as a chair with fire and fight and determination and passion. She organizes it, she sets the format, and she decides the process. And so, Ann, I know you're with us. Please know how grateful we are and how appreciative we are of what you do in the contributing to the Council 100 and the selection committee. Thank you. I wish I could say, and everybody would hear that. Today we have a panel of three, and it is exciting for me to introduce the first panelist, and it is Joyce Aiken. Joyce, I have worked with on many projects and different events, and what I come away with Joyce, and also listening to what Robert had to say, she is a woman of quiet strength. She has contributed greatly from teaching feminist art at Fresno State to going with promoting women artists in the country, being the first chair of the Council 100, founding with her students the Gallery 25, which is an ongoing longest co-op gallery in the United States. I am so very proud to have the opportunity to introduce to you Joyce Aiken.
Thank you very much. I really love being here. I love listening to Robert tell us the history of how he came about coming up with the idea of the Council 100. And I remember back at the very beginning, after he had received a grant for $25,000, he had to decide how to raise the money to match that. And he came up with the idea of our getting 100 women from the community to each put in $250. Now, I just computed that to see how much money that would be worth today, and that would be $625. So it was a real commitment for people at that time to join, and it was a brilliant way of raising the money. And it was one of the things that Robert did was to invite about 15 women at a time to a meeting. And I sat in on most of those meetings. We would explain the project. We would ask for their support and tell them about how much that would mean to our artist community. And instead of getting 100 women, we got 125 women who would donate to that project. And that's what got us started. And then Virginia Farquhar came on as our chair, and we decided to call it the Council of 100 because of the 100 people who had contributed to the project. And Virginia was incredible. She used to write out all of her speeches in longhand, page after page. And when I downsized, I didn't keep those pages, but that would have given us a history that was incredible. And fortunately, as we went through the organizational part, Robert asked if I would curate the first exhibition. And that was such a surprise to me, first of all, to do that. And I had never curated an exhibit before, but I had just recently come back from spending a year in Washington, D.C. and New York as head of the Coalition of Women's Art Organizations. And in New York, I met so many women artists that were producing and making their living and promoting the arts. And I thought, there's something that I could do here. And when Robert got into this project, I was just thrilled to be able to work with him and with the museum on it. And so when I started on the curation of that first show, the first person I went to see was June Wayne. I had known June from a number of other conferences that I had been involved with after I was with the coalition. And one of the things she said, which always stuck with me, when she was talking about the importance of the arts and the importance of supporting arts, she said, artists don't lick their wounds for healing. They lick their wounds for nourishment. And that stuck with me as something that was so important to the artists and to the art world. And then I went on from meeting with June to talk about what she could do for the museum, to Claire Falkenstein. And Claire had a huge warehouse that housed all of her art. And she had file drawer after file drawer of flat files of the work that she had saved that she thought was important to her career, started in the first grade. And I spent a whole day in her warehouse looking at art all the way up. I got such an education on her and on all the things she did in order to become an artist. And on to Inez Johnson, to Helen Lundeberg. Helen was the only one I did not get to visit her studio. Jay DeFeo, I saw, and 2 years later, she had died from cancer.
Yeah.
Martha Al, one of the most interesting women who's not as well known as some of these was Nell Sinton from San Francisco, who had a fabulous house up on a hill that overlooked the ocean. And she has said that one of the things that about her and her work is, if you want to stunt your growth, be rich, because she was rich and she had to fight that kind of idea. She had such a social connection to the prominent people in San Francisco. But one of her favorite pieces, she did a series of works that were called The Garden Party. And she displayed all of the affluent, prominent people in San Francisco and how they manipulated the arts. And it was quite a wonderful show, quite a wonderful piece. She never wanted her mother to see it because they were all her mother's friends. And so it was a really rich experience that I had, meeting all of these women and being able to spend time with them. I really thanked Robert for letting me do that show. And then Catherine Funk came along to do the following one. And what a dramatic change from the work that I looked at and the work that Catherine brought in, because all of a sudden we were getting performance artists, we were getting Rachel Rosenthal and Eleanor Antom. All these people came to the symposium in May. That's what the whole year led up to, and what the money that we raised for that symposium. We had environmental artists, we had art historians, we had Marcia Tucker, who had started the new museum, a lot of artists, Ruth Weisberg, a lot of artists that came then and became part of our 100 honorees. And of all of those, we had some of the very first woman we honored was June Wayne, and then Helen Lundeberg and Inez Johnson. Those were all part of the women that I had been able to meet with when I curated that first show. So then as we moved in to other artists, I think we have spanned a whole range of artists that have been really important, and especially in California. And what they have done is to bring to Fresno what we haven't had before, where we didn't have that spread of really well-known women artists. And I think it's been one of the real achievements of Fresno and of the museum. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. All right, I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Barbara Van Arnam. There you are up in the corner.
Hi.
There you are. Barbara, as Robert had said, excuse me, I keep calling him Bob and I have to call him Robert. I've never met him personally, so I apologize for that, Robert, again. But Robert, as he said about Barbara, I think it says it well. She was an artist to watch, and she still is. She's an active artist and has been for over 30 years, as all of you probably know. But when you look at her resume and you look at the work she's done, to me, it is phenomenal, about her color, her energy, her relationship to nature, and the movement of understanding and talking about, through her artwork, truth, what she sees. But most importantly for me, it is the fact that Barbara was the chair of the Council 100 for 15 years. And it was, and I imagine, a hard break from when Robert left, and to keep the Council 100 moving forward and keep that spirit and that action. And I only know from the volumes of records that Barbara did keep, where Bob regrets not publishing and Joyce didn't keep all of the information from what they did before they had the first one. Barbara must have either talked to Robert and Joyce, but she kept volumes of records of the C100. And I thank her for that because it certainly helped me. So Barbara brings today the insight from 1995 forward. And I am so thankful that she said yes. So here is Barbara Ben Arnam.
Hi, thank you, Pam. That's really nice. And thank you, Robert. Great job. I was looking through my own notes on Council of 100 and realized that the strength came from the artists. We were in dire straits sometimes because the membership would fall, just as with any organization, it waxes and wanes. So you have to go with the flow and how to get ourselves out of the rut and get something exciting again. I worked with some of the people were Polly Victor and Virginia Farquhar and Mary LaFollette, Jerry Peters, and Ellen Hirth was a major help. This was during the time when things were going a little bit sketchy for the Council of 100. And those were the years of about 2007 through about 2010. Well, we did it by enjoying artists, female artists that were at the museum, although not featured as Council of 100, and we would have conversations with them. So this happened about 3 or 4 times a year. And that got the public interested because the museum was still open when we would do these conversations. We have wine and hors d'oeuvres, and all the people who came into the museum would enjoy themselves. And we would encourage them to join and support the Council of 100. That did work. Yeah, that and the, I think it was Polly Victor, it could have been Maxine Olson, who suggested that maybe we should feature, because the local female artists are really not included in the Council of 100 Distinguished Award. Let's do something with a local female artist within that, outside of or within the 100-mile radius, I think was also put as a barrier for artists to overcome to get the award. So we did that. And we had conversations with Trude McDermott at her studio and home, Nancy Yodelman, and so many others that were just incredible. Anne Scheid, we visited your studio and enjoyed some refreshments there. And then a number of other people. So the fact that this council is still alive and kicking is actually truth to, this is Samson. Samson, say hello. Yeah, well, he doesn't want to say it. Yes, I know, I love you. That's our dog. So, okay, come down over there. That's a good boy. So, hip, hip, hooray. Cheers to all of you for supporting the Council of 100 and the Fresno Art Museum. And I think that's about all I can say now, because I'd have to look through all my notes and figure out other people that I should congratulate. So, and thank you, Pam, and of course, Michele, for putting this on. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Barbara. Your notes are safe at the museum because we still have all those notes. So, and it's been closed often. So that kind of stops you from knowing a lot.
Yeah.
Our next panelist is a woman that I got to know through the Distinguished Women Artist Award. She is our 2015 recipient. She is a delight, a beautiful woman inside and out. And I can't say enough things about her as a painter. She's a writer. She is one moment, because I want to say it correctly. She is a writer, a painter, and a professor of emerita of the arts from the University of Southern California, the Ruski School, no, I'm saying that right. Did I say that right? Excuse me. Ruski School of Art and Design.
Yes.
I'm so thankful she said yesterday, because oftentimes, like teachers, your students go away and you don't really know if you have much impact on their lives until many, many years later. So this is an opportunity for us at the Council 100 and at the museum to have a recipient come back and talk to us about her experience and how she has prospered with it through her work, through her talking to other women artists, and in her community. So with that, I'd like to introduce Margaret Lazari.
Oh, thank you, Pam. Everything you just said is so true. Receiving this award was really quite a wonderful milestone for me. You look at, the listing of the other women artists who have received this award and the pictures of them, and I just thought, oh my God, I am in such amazing company. That is, I can't describe to you how that makes me feel and how validating that is. And I would like to just talk maybe a little bit more about the specifics of how the honor really affected me. First of all, while I've had a number of gallery shows, this show was really the first museum show I had. And it's a totally different experience. The gallery shows, you bring in the current work, and you have a lot of say about it. But with the museum show, there's so many different levels of intense and friendly scrutiny. I think scrutiny may sound negative, but I don't mean it that way at all. Christina Hornback and Michele Ellis Pracy curated the show for me. They made a studio visit down. We hauled out everything. We went over things in such a way that it coalesced into a picture of myself that I hadn't had really before. And working with them was wonderful. But if that weren't enough, then you also get the wonderful benefit of the catalog, which is two different scrutinies. There was the selection of the images, but then the designer had this say about how they were put together and how they came together to make a product that I still find a valuable tool and a wonderful asset for myself. Just to have somebody else going over everything and talking about what your work means. And then a third level was the ability to have the interview and the other critic who reviewed the work. This is so validating. And then to have your work leave, and then you go back and you see it outside of your space in this other beautiful space, beautifully installed. That's just amazing. And I feel like that I didn't myself understand what the impact of that would be. And I myself did not understand how rich that experience would be and how it would make me feel down the road. And, down the road, the way it's made me feel is honored, of course, but I got the sense that I had really reached a very important milestone. That's kind of a scary thing on one level, because you think, oh my God, you reach a certain milestone, it might mean that you're about one step away from being embalmed and you're done. But oddly enough, the reaching of the milestone meant that I felt that I had freedom to really experiment. So I have been able to try some projects and some things that I honestly don't think I would have tried without having that sort of foundation already in place. I feel like, I don't know, I can do some really funny or, I don't know, out there kinds of things. It's also given me a desire to give back. And so there are things that I feel like I support and want to continue supporting because I see the value of this, and that's pretty great. And then also, you know, you have the long-term relationship with the museum, which warms my heart. What can I say? And, you know, just a few months ago, Sarah Vargas asked me to do a studio visit via Zoom for the museum. And once again, it's a funny thing, you know, you might think the artist feels like, well, I'm giving all of this stuff, but I have to say each of these encounters has been so much given back to me. So doing the studio visit and having the conversation and showing my work, even on Zoom, I had to be much more present with my work and much more thoughtful about it. And then, you know, working with Sarah as we kind of crafted it. That result was that once again, I felt I had another set of eyes and another kind of big taking stock of the work. And so I think that's a summation of what it has meant to me, but I can't emphasize enough how grateful I feel for everything I received from this award. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Margaret. Listening to you talk, it reminds me that, and also with Robert and everyone here, whether it be Joyce or Barbara or Michele, the Distinguished Women Artists, it's a collaboration, but it also is a development of a long-term relationship. It is an ability to connect with artists, women artists, and it sounds to me, and what we've been trying to do is that's what it's doing for you artists, is that you have a connection to people who validate you and appreciate you, and you still have it in you. You're not done. You get to keep going. And that is a good feeling that we get to say, because the requirement being 25 years of body of work, you've put in the time and you put in the effort. And oftentimes I have a feeling that we go invisible. You know, there's so many new and exciting things still happening that it's hard to get a voice in there. So I'm glad that we've stimulated you and that you are wanting to do that. I'd like to open up to the rest of the group. As I said earlier in my presentation, this is an opportunity for you to ask questions. So do any of you have questions or statements you like, or recollection of your experience to Joyce, Barbara, or Margaret? Oh boy.
Susan can help facilitate that,
Okay,
I believe.
you're on, Susan.
Yeah, I'm unmuting myself. Yeah, if anyone, there aren't any questions in the chat because I think they answered so many that we might have had already with their wonderful information that was just given. If anybody does have any questions, if you want to just raise your hand either on the screen like this, or you can hit, Ann Scheid, I'm calling on you. Can you unmute?
I think I'm unmuted.
You are.
One of the things that struck me from Robert, from your beautiful timeline, was how you were always in conversation. Joyce, you were saying the same thing, always in conversation with other artists, with other friends who were smart and art-oriented about the direction of the museum, or, you know, what would be the most advantageous approach in exhibitioning for the region that would interest the people that live here, as well as make a kind of a stamp in terms of identity for us. And that idea of having ongoing conversations feels valuable and something that we can use for the future, and talking with each other, as well as, I mean, Robert's still around. There are lots of folks around that have been mentioned here. Trude's around. So what does the conversation need to, what are the questions now as we go forward? How do we continue representing women artists in California and staying on the edge and with what's happening. So I guess it's kind of a statement, a thank you, and thoughts about direction. And I guess that is going to Robert and Joyce.
Go.
If I may say, Anne, I think your selection committee is very diverse. And in all of the meetings we've had where they each present their choice, and we get an in-depth look-see at these particular artists, whether we're aware of them or not, prior to the meeting. They represent all medium, and the voting is so intelligent and fair that by the time the honoree is selected out of this group of really qualified artists who are women, I think you are doing what Robert set out to do, and Barbara maintained, and Joyce was part of the vision for this. And I've never been part of such a thing in all of my years in the museum field. It's unique to Fresno. And in my opinion, after 7 years of interfacing with this group and hearing Robert's impetus for its birth, I think we are doing that. That's my feeling. So thank you, everybody.
I'd like to just say a couple of things about the culmination of that year of the women artists, and that was the symposium. I don't know how many of the people here who are watching today were part of that, but I think we brought the best of the women artists from around the country that we could, and from Rachel Rosenthal and Eleanor Antum and Joe Harvey Allen, who were all performance artists, which we had not had in the museum before. And then the feminist artists, we had Miriam Shapiro and Faith Wilding, Lita Albuquerque as an environmental artist, and art historians, Arlene Raven, Myra Roth, Charlotte Rubenstein. Marcia Tucker had just formed the new museum. Then we had a whole list of women artists, Ruth Weisberg, all of the artists that were then, eventually some of them became part of our distinguished artists, women artists. And I think it opened up for Fresno the idea that we could accept new ideas, new artists, and bring to Fresno what was happening in the rest of the country.
Yep. Yes, Robert.
Let's ask Catherine to share her recollections. Catherine Funk should share her recollections of the year.
Yes.
Well, it was an incredible year, and as Robert, you may recall, when we embarked on it, I also said at the beginning, because I knew it was going to be a big job, that I wanted to exit at the end of that time, which I did leave the museum at that time. And but as I went out and met other artists from around California, it was wonderful that many of them had been at the symposium and had been very impressed with what the Fresno Art Museum was able to pull off. And so that was, I was very grateful for having had that opportunity and to actually, because as most people know, when you're working within the museum structure, you're planning, you're always planning a couple of years out because you have to prepare for your grant making and all of that. And which was one reason why I just felt like I wanted to really saturate that my last times with the museum in working on this program. And it was such a reward to have that opportunity to do that. So, and I have loved coming back to Fresno and seeing many of the distinguished artist shows over the years, and seeing many of them that were included in the original shows. And Robert, here's a suggestion, because I think the museum may still have all of the, of course, they're on a different format, but might have all of those videos of the performance artists that were, we had Christine Tamlin as a guest curator for the performance and video artists that were included in the year-long series. So it would be wonderful if that could be all put into a current format. That would be something that the public could see, those early years of artists that were in that, working in that medium.
Thank you.
I have a question as the current chair and listening to it. I've asked this question before, and so I'm not married to an answer. But here's what I would like to know. Do you think it's still appropriate that we select outside of the radius of Fresno and Greater Fresno? Because to me, there are many, many working artists today that now have enough work that could be considered. What is your opinion, everyone? Do we want to continue to leave it as it is, or do we want to include all women regardless of where they reside in our areas?
I think originally we thought, am I unmuted?
No,
No.
you're fine. Yeah, you're fine.
I think we originally thought that we should explore outside of the region. And I think that one of the things we talked about in the selection committee a few years ago was, if we aren't going to honor women within our area as a distinguished women artist, we ought to consider giving them an exhibition at the museum. And that's one of the things that we gave either or on that. And so that's another consideration.
Yes, and we took that concept up and gave Nancy Yodelman a
Mhm.
retrospective a few years into my tenure at the Fresno Art Museum, because she couldn't be nominated or considered as a distinguished woman artist because she lived in the city. So we did do that, and it was a great balance of recognizing actually a charter member of the Council 100. She's on our selection committee, and I enjoyed working with her very much and giving her that opportunity.
Then my next question is, to pass the baton on so the Council 100 keeps growing. Do any of you have suggestion how we can incorporate the new, the young, those that are working now that don't meet the criteria but are working, how we can get them involved in the Council 100 in the museum to get their input and to see what their ideas about the Council 100 moving forward? Blank stares. I see you, Michele.
Now I'm thinking.
Barbara, you had something to say?
Yes, that idea that the council board had come up with and backed fully, of at least doing studio visits for the artists. For instance, Nanette Mackey-Dearson was one that we did. And there we would include not only Council of 100 individuals to come to this studio visit and have a luncheon sort of a thing, sometimes inside the museum, sometimes out in the studio. We encourage those council members to bring guests who were not members of Council of 100 and perhaps weren't even museum members, and to show them the vitality of what's going on right now, because I'm not sure about expanding or contracting the geographic parameters, I guess is what you would call, in terms of allowing other artists who are more locally based as the distinguished woman artist. But certainly I commend Michele and her staff for choosing women artists out of the community to have an exhibition at the Fresno Art Museum. When you do that, their friends, their family, everyone who's involved in their universe participates in that too. And that expands the truth of what's possible with art and what's possible with this museum. It's a great space. It's beautiful.
It is. It is.
And you should, if you haven't seen that Moravian gallery lately, you really need to go in there. That's an example of what the lighting change does work. It's pretty beautiful. Okay, I said enough.
Oh, yeah.
I would just like to, I'd like to acknowledge Sarah Vargas and her current exhibition entitled Here She Stands, which during the pandemic, we looked to our permanent collection for exhibitions because it was safer to go that direction. And we also love to expose our public, both who are not known to us and who are known to us, that what we hold for them in trust. And in her exhibition, which fills the 3 main galleries and is very comprehensive, there are a number of Council 100 artists in that exhibition. So we have not been able to open those galleries because the new lighting has been delayed, but we believe it's almost finished. And we'll make an announcement when those galleries are reopened. But it's definitely an homage to who we hold in trust for you, who we believe are terrific women artists, and a nod to Council 100 members or honorees who are in our permanent collection. So thank you, Sarah, for doing that show. Yes, Sally.
Yeah, I have a comment, if I might, regarding the geographic parameters. I really support however the council decides to certainly include women closer to the Fresno Center in some way. The fact that they would be excluded seems improper in a fundamental way. However you want to try to do that, and maybe what you're doing already is good, you know, that they can be honored with their own shows. But at any rate, getting back to the other question, I think the idea of conversation has been coming up through this whole question and answer. And it's interesting, you know, that symposium that people have been mentioning, I was there. I know it. And I knew, we knew in LA, people were talking about it and said, you've got to be there. You know, you've got to go up and you've got to be there because this is going to be incredibly important. So I think the idea of important conversations like that are really ambitious, and you kind of need to reach occasionally and do those things. But the nice thing about Zoom is that you can also have very much more informal conversations where, you know, maybe everyone invites another person to participate, but small groups, and you bring together a community through that sort of informal conversation as well. That's all.
Good suggestion. Yes, Michele.
No, that's Sally.
Oh, Sally, sorry.
Sally,
You're muted.
Muted. Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I wasn't in on the ground floor like Joyce and some of you others, but I'm just wondering, I would love to see, we have so many talented and young, fabulous women artists in our community in Fresno County, Fresno County, what have you. I'd love to see if there's a way that Council of 100 could honor one of those women, and not just outside the boundaries. But I don't know how cemented that idea is with its original formation, or if there's flexibility with that. And that would certainly be open for all of your discussions as a board. But I myself, I've just seen so much talent right here in our community, and what a thrill for a woman artist here in our area to be honored. And in doing that, it may even bring in more people into Council of 100, into museum, so on. The idea of being honored is slightly different than being given a show. In many ways, they are the same, but to actually to have that name tribute, you are honored. So that's my 2 cents for whatever it's worth. And I just respect and honor all of you and the great, wonderful talents you have brought to our community. So, and I'd love to see one of you honored, to be honest. At any rate, nice to see you all. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, did you have a question? Oh, there we go.
Yes. You might consider a group show of more local artists to begin with. And the thing that Sally mentioned, which I think is a really good thing, is that would bring in a lot more people, a whole diverse community of people to the art museum that are local and hopefully become supporters.
I asked the question because I think we have to always check in to see if it's still working, if can it be improved. And I agree with you. I think we need to continue to talk. And when the board can actually come back together again, this could be a question that we could talk about it, especially with our selection committee, and get some ideas and feedback. Because what both of you, Sally and you, have said, Kate, is true from my point of view. I'm not a working artist. I work on the administrative side of it, but there's so much talent there, and they've been contributing for so many years. I like to see us have a further conversation about it.
Something just to consider as we consider adding ideas for exhibitions at the museum is that we have 6-month exhibition seasons now. I don't rotate shows out every 3 months. So it means twice a year, we have a new series of shows. The museum is closed while we take down the old season and install the new season. And then it's up for 6 months, which often behooves the artist, as more people can come see it over time. More people can come back more than once, and we have more time for additional programming, enrichment programming. And at this point, Sarah and I have booked the museum out through 2025. Wow. Because we lost 1.5 years, and we work 3 years in advance, whether we're bringing in a traveling exhibition that we start working on 3 years prior to it actually arriving on our doorstep, and also our curation of local artists. We also give ourselves that lead time. So we're booked now through 2025. We are hoping the pandemic is under control, and in February, we can open our new season, including Warhol, Ansel Adams, and Chester Arnold. In the manner of our old celebrations, we are hoping that that is possible, and they'll be on a whole new trajectory again, like the good old days. But that is something to consider. We don't have every 3 months a switch out. Something Sarah and I do focus on, and I've been insistent upon it, is that we do show a local artist in each season, if we can, in a 1 or 2 person show. And we also pull from our permanent collection in one way or another, a small exhibition or a big exhibition like Here She Stands. The people do see what we hold in trust. We have over 3,800 pieces in our permanent collection, and most of them are California and regional at this point.
You're right, Michelle, you're doing a wonderful job of outreach and getting the relationship stronger between the local artist and the artists from the outside. So I applaud you. When the Council 100 meets again, we will have some discussions, and we'll keep asking good questions about a variety of things. So I thank you. Are there any more questions or concerns anybody would like to say? Oh, I see a hand raise. Sally again.
Oh,
Are you there?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
yes.
Yes, thank you. This was just fabulous. I mean, absolutely fabulous. All that learning the history from Robert and each of the speakers, and seeing all you artists once again. But will there be future Zoom meetings where you meet and discuss, and if so, will that be open to all the Council of 100 members who wish to attend by Zoom, or just will that work?
We will talk about it. Absolutely.
Okay.
We will absolutely, because we can fit this in on a weekend or after a work day. You know, that's the beauty of Zoom, that as long as other people can join us, time is not a problem. We just have to make sure that it's at a time when people can be part of us.
And we can all wear our slippers, right?
That's right.
That's right.
I won't tell.
And we can look at our
Yes,
scenery.
Susanna.
Susanna?
Loved it.
Hi, I just want to thank all of you, everyone, the artists, the museum staff, everyone who's worked on and started this Council of 100. A couple of my mentors and are here. As an educator, here's a question I have. I mean, I really, when the shows have been up, I do things with my students along it. Side the show, it's been very important for me to share that, the exhibitions and the talks with my students. Margaret, we used your textbook in my class, and so it was wonderful for the students, to use your textbook and see, example of your art, and then go see the whole exhibition. That's been very important. And to pick up the thread that's been discussed here about expanding, I'd like to know if there's any ideas about how we can get more audience, youth involved, audience members and educators. And I'm willing to help. I'm on the selection committee, but I think that's a real thing that I struggle with, as well as getting my students the shows. But if we can maybe have some dialogue with educators to, come up with maybe if lesson plans or something to incorporate the show, not just the Council of 100 show, but other exhibitions at the museums, and build that next generation of viewers, of art supporters, of artists, and inspire them the way I've been inspired. I'm a historian, not an artist, but again, I want to know if you have anybody has any thoughts about that.
Actually, Susanna, we have some programs that we work very closely with Fresno County Office of Education, or Superintendent of Schools now, through the Kennedy Center Any Given Child program, where we see close to 7,000 students in a normal year. We haven't because of the pandemic, but we have done virtual tours with them, where we have an extensive program with unit plans and lesson plans that focus on current exhibitions, particularly on an exhibition that I curate on an illustrator, children's book illustrator. So we have that going. It'd be wonderful to expand it into other areas, and we are trying to come up with programming with other things as well.
Yeah, and for the college level, that's the one I'm, of course, more concerned with.
Yeah.
And we used to have a student rate for the museum admission, and that's, we have a group, but it's really hard to get funding to get a tour together, to get, the museum paid for. So I'm wondering if you might even think about, extending the student rate to college students. I have a lot of students who just can't afford to go.
Okay, I'll look into that. That's my bailiwick. So I will see what we can afford to on that end. Also, we have invested in an app this year called Culture Connect, and all of our gallery exhibitions are on this app, and your students and you can access this anytime, and they can get a preview of the exhibition. We are also mounting QR codes within the museum, so people can shoot those. I'm learning the lingo, and go more in depth to a website or curatorial statements or whatever. So that is available, which was not available before the pandemic, because we had to learn how to be a viable institution without being bricks and mortar. And we spent all of last year and a half purchasing this, learning it, enhancing it, making it accessible. And it's on our e-blast every week. It's on our website on the homepage. And Susanna, I think your students could really enjoy it as a prelude to actually visiting in person, or in lieu of being able to visit in person. And I will look into the pricing.
Thank you. And Cindy had actually a statement, Cindy Wathen, in the chat about social media devoted to, you know, the younger. I know that it takes a lot of time and effort. So if you're looking for volunteers from students, I think we have some students who, you know, are want to get training and you can in that and then help out maybe that way.
We do have Instagram, and we do have a staff member who's in her 20s and very savvy about that age group. She is the Instagram and Twitter expert, and we're very active, the Fresno Art Museum, on Instagram. And she also transfers, of course, those automatically to Facebook. And then I'm an administrator on there in a more staid manner and less flash and bang. And we have another administrator who also contributes to our Facebook page. And we have over 8,000 participants on that page.
And it's not specific to Council of 100, which is what
No.
the suggests, but you know, that's also a possibility, I'm sure, especially if you get some younger members in the council. There's another notice in the chat that Judy Chicago has an amazing retrospective at the DeYoung, in case people aren't aware of it. So I just wanted to bring that up.
I'd like to say something.
Yes, Jack.
I'm tagging on with you, Susanna, because when the symposium happened, that was a major example of what this community can do. And we brought, you know, the big names from the East Coast and from the West Coast, and people got so excited. But that didn't just happen out of the blue. It started in the 70s when Judy Chicago came here, the feminist art program, and then Joyce took that over, Joyce Aiken. And then that grew in even more because through the feminist art program, Gallery 25 started. And there was this whole group of young people, like, you know, younger than, well, probably around 20 and into their 30s, that had so much energy and so much excitement. Those were just very heady times. So the environment was ready for something like what Robert decided on, the Distinguished Woman Artist Award, which was brilliant and just perfect to have that symposium. And it was a lot of young energy that was happening. And there's so many young artists in this community now, you know, so many people that have lofts and studios. We didn't have any of that then, but we had, it was like a coalition that we had. So it was a body of people that were really excited about the same things. It seems now that they're kind of scattered. And Susanna, you're right. We need to somehow coalesce those people again so that they can have that same kind of energy and excitement to infuse the museum with the ideas and ways of getting funding that will take us in that direction and take us uphill. It's doable. It's been hard these past few years, but I really believe it's doable. And it's exciting to think about it.
I agree. And what I'm hearing over and over again is the collaboration, as you're saying, but also it's kind of technology. What we learned through the pandemic was vital, so we stayed connected, but we all miss the humanness, being in contact, having that relationship, being able to see them in person, that we can't forget that element. And that sounds like that's what worked for the symposium the time you did it, that brought everybody together at one spot where they were interacting, not through technology, but one-on-one. And that's something for us to review back with the Council 100 and say, is it time for another symposium? Is it a time to come back and collaborate together and continue the movement forward and not just let it be what it is right now? So thank you for making those comments. I appreciate it.
Well, I have to admit that it surprises me, but these kinds of forums satisfy that need quite a bit. And a lot gets done through these forums. So I think doing a few more of these kinds of things to see how it goes and what kind of ideas come out of it is really important.
Good.
We will. We will.
Thank you. Are there any more questions?
There aren't any in the chat, and I don't see any raised hands.
Okay, so with that, I'd like to thank Joyce, Barbara, and Margaret for being our panelists today. And I appreciate the opportunity for us to talk to one another through our questions and learning about how you feel about the Zoom and how it's going. But before I pass it on to Michele, I want to take a moment as a chair. You know, Barbara was a chair up into 2010. It's not to 2012 that I get a call from Zandy Ogata saying that if we don't find someone to take the chair, then there won't be a Council 100 board. People are not wanting to take it. And, you know, I come from the background of being a director of the Tulare Kings Regional Arts Council, Kern County Arts Council, and Fresno Arts Council, along with being the program manager of the Department of Corrections Arts and Corrections program. So I'm an administrator more so than I am anything else. And I questioned Zandy. I said, "Are you sure?" I mean, I'm not sure. But she said, "Yeah, if you don't have a person, then we have to have someone be the chair." So I met with them and I agreed to do that. By nothing that I said, I am not the reason why the Council 100 is today, even moving forward. So I like to recognize those women who did make it possible for us to be here today in 2021. And those women are Laura Meyer, Ellen Hirth, Zandy Ogata, Susanna Sosa, Joan Sharma, the late Maxine Olson, Carol Takesian, and Ann Scheid. These are the ladies I ultimately want you to know to thank. They're the ones that picked up that torch and said, we're going to continue to carry on. And my questions today is that I want to continue the torch being passed on, and that it doesn't just reside with those of us who have history, memory of it, of the C100. So I thank you very, very much today for listening and participating and asking questions. Thank you so very much. I'm going to turn it back over to Michele Pracy.
Yes, thank you, Pam, Robert, Joyce, Barbara, and Margaret, and all of the people who joined us today. You all contributed today. You've all contributed in the past, and the Council of 100 is a crowning jewel in the programming at the Fresno Art Museum. In closing, I want to acknowledge funding from the McClatchy Fresno Arts Endowment of the James B. McClatchy Foundation for making this panel possible. Without their funding, and they supported the entire fall season that is currently on view, including Here She Stands, they funded this for us and allowed us to do this. And we need to depend on the people out there who have the money, who believe in our mission and support us in our decisions on carrying that mission forward. So thank you, everybody. It's been a great morning/afternoon, and I know I have a lot to think about this afternoon and into the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think we're done for the day.
That concludes it.
That concludes our panel. Thank you, everybody.